Did you always want to have a family? Of course, I've mentioned this a few times, and as my mum might tell you, I told my parents that by the time I was 25, I wanted to have 3 kids. Oh, how naive I was. How silly I was. How naive I was. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the podcast. My name's Lewis, and as I'm sure you know, this is British English Pod, your podcast for slow English in a perfect English accent, wink, wink, whilst I teach lots of words, phrases, phrasal verbs, idioms, slang, and so much more. So, I'm glad to have you back, and if you're new, well, welcome to the podcast. I hope you find it useful. So useful. And today I'm in a bit of a rush. I'm in a bit of a hurry, I must admit. So I'm not going to waste too much time at the beginning. I'm not going to mess around too much. I'm going to cut to the chase. I'm going to get to the point. But first, if you are watching this, you're probably thinking, Lewis, you've grown a mustache. How come? What's going on? And yes, I've got a little bit of a mustache. And I must ask you a question. How do you feel about facial hair? Do you like clean shaven, a little bit of stubble, a mustache, or a beard? If you're a man, do you like to have facial hair? And if you're a woman who is attracted to men, do you like men to be clean shaven, with stubble, mustache, or a beard? Let me know in the comments. And usually I grow my mustache in November because it is Movember, which is a month when there is, well, a non-profit company, which I think originates from Australia, which is designed to bring more attention to men's health, whether that's testicular cancer or whether that's mental health and speaking to other men about how we feel. Movember is a really good cause, and, well, people can donate to men who are growing their beard during this month so that there is more research and support and help for men who are struggling with either physical health issues or mental health issues. So if you haven't heard of Movember, you can Google it and check out the website. And that being said, I guess in November this year, which is still a few months away, well, even longer than a few months away, it's 7 months away, I'll probably do Movember. Why not? Because I kind of like having a mustache. And it was Monday when I was having a shave, and I was shaving the sides of my face. I was shaving around my chin. I was shaving around my Adam's apple and my neck. And then I just had above my lip left. So I was like, oh, actually, I fancy leaving my mustache. I don't know how long for. Maybe tomorrow morning I wake up and I look in the mirror and I think, ugh, that's ugly. I need to get rid of it. And then I'll shave it off. Or perhaps I'll go out this weekend and I'll get complimented on my mustache. And then I might think to myself, ooh, maybe it's a good look. Maybe I'm going to grow it even more. So we will see. The mustache is here for now, but whether it will be here this time next week, well, we will find out. We will see. Now, that's a little bit of an introduction. Now, let's focus on the topic. And this week, in my group classes and private classes, we've been speaking all about milestones. You know, these big moments that people go through in life. So, of course, I thought, well, as usual, I would recap what we have done in class so everybody can learn about the topic with some idioms and expressions and hear me answering lots of questions. And as always, if you want to join my classes, there is a link in the description. So, milestones. Let's brainstorm. Let's see if we can come up with some common milestones. So, off the top of your head, without taking time to think, what major milestones happen in life? Which ones come to mind? Well, I'm going to go through some major milestones in chronological order. So, from the day you are born until the day you die. And of course, we don't always have to say die. We can also say pass away. My grandma, rest in peace, passed away last year. And we could use an expression, which is to kick the bucket. My grandma kicked the bucket last year. But to be honest, this sounds sometimes a bit disrespectful. So it's a much more of a slang option. So yeah, my grandma passed away last year. But let's go through these major milestones. First up, after you are born, well, you start crawling. You start walking. Then hopefully you start speaking. And then potty training. What is a potty, you might think? A potty is a portable toilet that is given to babies when they're about, 1, 2, or 3 years old, so that they practice going to the toilet and having a wee and a poo in a toilet so that they can stop wearing nappies. In British English, we say nappies. In American English, they say diapers. So yeah, those are, I guess, some minor milestones in early life. And I have to tell you a slightly funny story. I've always loved my food. I've been a big foodie ever since the day I was born, I suppose. So much so that, well, can you guess my first word? My first word, sorry. Well, of course, I said like mama, mummy, or dada, daddy. I think everybody does that before anything else. But after that, my first proper word was more, more, more. And the context is that, well, when it was time for food, breakfast, lunch, dinner, and I was being fed, maybe using these tricks of, here comes the aeroplane, here comes the aeroplane, open your mouth, yummy. Then little baby Lewis would respond by saying, more, 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 give me more, I want more. So, yeah, I've always been a bit of a chubby, big-boned, fat, and greedy baby. I've always loved my food ever since I was a little kid. So yeah, that was my first word. Now continuing with some more milestones. After that, you start going to nursery. And nursery is kindergarten, really. And when you go, well, you have your first experiences of making friends, which I imagine is quite intimidating. It's quite daunting for many kids because you haven't done this that much before then. And well, after a year of nursery, you start school and maybe you have a school uniform as well. And I guess for parents, this must be a really emotional day. It must be a really moving day. Because, well, you see your baby who is now all grown up. And now they're becoming more independent. They can walk, they can talk, they can study. And yeah, you've got to let go. You've got to let go of control. And when this happens, well, children learn to read and write if they're lucky. In most places, of course, everybody learns to read and write nowadays. And this is when I think kids' personalities and characteristics are forged. They are shaped. Developing hobbies and interests, you start to know really what you're into. And then as the years go by, well, puberty comes. And I remember being maybe 10, 11, or 12, just before my teens, and at school they would tell you about the changes that are going to happen to you during puberty. That for little girls, they're going to start to have the period for the first time. And of course, we start growing hair where we didn't have hair before. You start to feel different things. You start to become maybe more attracted to other people. And I think your hormones are up and down as well. So puberty can be a little bit of a turbulent time for a lot of kids. I don't think it really was for me. I think I've always been quite stable in many aspects of my life. And I don't think I really misbehaved when I became a teenager and I was starting to develop a bit of stubble and a bit of hair on my chest. I think I just, I went with it as my body and my mind was changing. Because, well, at the same time, you've got to focus on doing your exams, getting qualifications. You start maybe getting your first girlfriend or boyfriend. And of course, during this time, everything is so exciting because you've got so many firsts. You have your first kiss. You have the first time you get drunk. The first time you sleep over at a friend's house. And then as you get older, you have the first time you try to drive a car. And then you have the first time that you go to university, if people went to university. And you move out of your parents' house in many cases as well. So you can finally be free. You have freedom. And this is when, for many people, maybe they go crazy and they start going out non-stop. But if you don't go to uni, well, the other alternative is to study a trade and learn how to be a builder or maybe a plumber or an electrician, which, to be honest, is probably a very good choice nowadays because we see artificial intelligence taking over so many jobs. But the people who are laughing from a privileged position at the moment, well, it's people who work in a hands-on way. They work with their hands, and for now at least, their professions, their trades, are safe from AI. But yeah, those are some of the changes, and after that, I guess you are officially an adult. And when you've been working in a company for a while, you can get your first promotion with a pay rise, and you take on more responsibility. How exciting. And well, if everything goes well in your life, you can buy a house. And if you have met somebody, you can get married if you want to, or enter some kind of civil partnership. These are the big changes, I suppose, that we will discuss a little bit more later. And then, of course, it's becoming less and less common nowadays, but many people decide to have children, to start a family, to settle down. And I think this is the first milestone that really, really changes everything. Because buying a house, well, you end up having a mortgage and you're in debt. It doesn't change who you are and what you're like. Getting married, in most cases, it doesn't change the relationship. But when you decide to start a family and you have kids, that's when I think it is a huge game changer and the situation changes completely. And well, you have to take care of the family. You have to provide for your family. You have to educate them, raise them, and teach them so many things. So this is the biggest milestone, in my opinion. But of course, not everybody decides that they want to have a family. Or maybe it's not possible. Maybe you try and it just doesn't work out. And in that case, of course, you could choose to adopt, but it's up to you. As I like to say, each to their own. Each to their own. Which is essentially saying everyone's different and we all do different things and we respect each other's choices. That is fundamental, if you ask me. And now moving on to getting a little bit older. Ooh, I know we don't like to think about it. I don't like to think about getting older either. Every year that I get older and celebrate my birthday, I think to myself, oh, I'm no spring chicken anymore. I tell myself, I'm no spring chicken anymore. What does it mean, I'm no spring chicken anymore? Well, it's a creative and fun way of saying, I'm not young anymore. I'm no spring chicken anymore. But as you do get older, well, your children might move out and you can, woohoo, you can celebrate freedom again. And then maybe as you enter your 60s or 70s, you start to retire. And hopefully you have a nice pension to be able to live a dignified life during retirement. And if, well, you have decided to raise a family and then your son or daughter meets someone, you could become a grandparent. And I reckon from that point, you have almost completed and ticked off most of these stereotypical milestones in life. As I said, everybody decides to do things differently at different stages in their life. I know some people don't want to have kids, or you can't have kids. But I think if you have had children, then becoming a granddad or a grandmom, that is the pièce de résistance. That is the crème de la crème. It is like the icing on top of the cake. And what about you? Can you think of any common stereotypical milestones that I've missed out, that I've forgotten? I reckon I've covered the vast majority, but I suppose you could also consider traveling, moving abroad, going on your first holiday, going on your first family holiday or holiday with your partner. So these could be other milestones that we could add. Now, let me answer some questions related to these periods of time in everybody's lives. The first one I want to answer is, how did you feel about exams? Because at school, doing your first exams can be a huge milestone. I think, like most people, I always got a little bit nervous before I did an exam. I always tried to study as much as possible, but I wasn't a big nerd either. I wasn't a big geek either. So I'd always study, but I wouldn't absolutely study all night long. So I got slightly nervous before exams, but I didn't take things so seriously that I lost sleep overnight. But exams are not fun. Nobody enjoys doing exams, and once you've finished them and the time has run out during the exam, for most people, I think it's a relief. You think to yourself, phew, thank God that's over. Move on. Now, the next question I'm going to answer is, are you a home owner? In other words, do you own a house? No, I am not a homeowner. I don't own a house. I rent the apartment I live in at the moment in Brussels, and it's not cheap, but it's not too expensive either. And I'm in the process of trying to save money, as is my fiance, for our wedding, because that's going to be pretty expensive, to say the least. But I'm not a homeowner. But my aim is by maybe this time next year, I would like to invest in property. I'd like to buy a flat or buy a house. But there are many variables. It depends on many factors. So it's something I'd like to do. I would like to get on the property ladder, meaning invest in property for the first time. But at the moment, as things stand, I'm not a homeowner, no. Now, one more question. Did you always want to have a family? Of course, I've mentioned this a few times, and as my mum might tell you, I told my parents that by the time I was 25, I wanted to have 3 kids. Oh, how naive I was. How silly I was. How naive I was. Because I think when you're growing up, you don't realize the responsibility of having kids. You don't realize that it involves sacrificing so much of your freedom and free time. And I didn't realize how slowly I was going to mentally grow up. Because I still feel very young at heart. And I don't feel like I've grown up completely in many ways. I still feel like I'm the Lewis who went to university, which unfortunately I'm not. I'm, 33 and a half now. So I'm approaching my mid-30s, which makes me shudder. It sends shivers down my spine. So, of course, I do not have children at the moment at the age of 33. So my dream when I was a little kid of having a family of 3 children by the time I was 25 has long gone. There was no chance of that ever happening. And I'm glad. I'm definitely glad I didn't have kids in my early 20s because maybe I wasn't prepared and it would have been a lot of work and I wouldn't have been able to travel anywhere near as much as I have. And I really enjoyed my 20s, and now in my 30s, I'm more concentrated, more focused, and now I am, let's say, reaching these milestones. But yeah, one day I would like to have a family. Let's see what happens. Now, from there, let's look back on life. And look back on is a nice phrasal verb that we actually saw last week. And it is to reminisce and to feel nostalgic or to think about what you did in life. And if you're looking at the screen, you can see a nice image from the famous film The Notebook. The Notebook, which is with Ryan Gosling and Rachel McAdams. And it's a really cheesy, corny, romantic film. And this usually isn't my kind of film. I'm not really into rom-coms or romance, but I must admit that The Notebook is a film that I kind of like. It's beautiful, it's emotional, it's heartwarming, and it's sad at the same time. So if you haven't watched The Notebook, check it out. If you have watched it, let me know. Are you a fan? Do you like this film? And the reason I've included this in the PowerPoint is because now I'm going to read to you an extract of a text, a little article that I've made up with a little bit of help from artificial intelligence. to review some advanced vocabulary, and also now for you to practice your listening skills, and feel free to shadow me at the same time. So we have some words at the bottom as well that, as I am reading, I want you to figure out which word completes each gap. The words available are bustling, which is a way of saying busy, headstrong, which is a way of saying stubborn, slipped, which is what happens when you fall over, murmur, which is a verb to speak not very clearly. If I'm murmuring, I'm speaking like this. You can't really hear what I'm saying, or I'm not really vocalizing at all. I'm murmuring. The fifth one is forged, which is like created or shaped. And the sixth word is gazing. You can gaze out of the window, like to stare. So now let me read. I often find myself gazing out of the window, watching the seasons change. I'm reflecting on the life I have lived. It feels both fleeting and expansive, as though the years slipped through my fingers, while simultaneously leaving a huge mark on my soul. I was born into a modest little house on the outskirts of a bustling town. My childhood was unremarkable in many ways, yet filled with moments of quiet joy. Long summer afternoons spent chasing butterflies, and the comforting murmur of my mother's voice as she read to me before bed. Those early days, though distant now, remain in my memory with surprising clarity. Adolescence, however, was far more turbulent. I was headstrong and eager to carve out my own path, often clashing with my parents in my pursuit of independence. Yet it was during those formative years that I forged friendships that would stand the test of time and discovered a resilience I never knew I possessed. Excellent. That is the first half of this text. Now, let's look at the second half, which is a continuation of this woman looking back on her life. Again, we've got 6 different keywords, so let's go over the meanings. The first is enriching, an adjective to say it makes you feel richer culturally. After that, we have sheer. And sheer is used to say like total or complete. The sheer scale of the war. The sheer excitement when I saw the roller coaster. So it's like saying complete or total. After that, we have rewarding, which is something that makes you feel good, nice, like you have rewards. Teaching is a rewarding job. The fourth word is twilight. And twilight is, well, like sunset. The twilight, the end. The fifth one is weathering. Now, I bet you didn't know, but to weather is also a verb. So the weather, it's sunny today. But if you weather something, you get through it. You deal with it. You survive it, basically. You weathered the storm. You survived the storm. And the sixth word is missteps. If you take a misstep, well, you take a wrong step. So it's another way of saying like a bad decision or a mistake. All right, now let me read. So, in my early 20s, I left home with little more than a suitcase and an abundance of ambition. Life was not always kind, but it was undeniably enriching. I fell in love, recklessly at first, then deeply, and eventually married a man whose quiet strength complemented my restless spirit. Together, we built a life from the ground up, weathering hardships and celebrating triumphs in equal measure. Raising children was perhaps the most demanding, yet rewarding chapter of my life. There were moments of sheer exhaustion, total exhaustion, of course, but also immeasurable pride as I watched them grow into compassionate and capable individuals. Now, in the twilight of my years, I take solace in the simpler things: a warm cup of tea, the laughter of my grandchildren, and the knowledge that, despite its imperfections, my life has been rich in meaning. If I have any regrets, they are few, and I don't think too much about them. For, in the end, it's not the missteps that define us, but the courage with which we carry on. Okay, I'm giving myself a round of applause. So I hope you liked that little story time and that little bit of listening practice with a more structured story. And as I said, that was an example of a woman who was reaching the twilight of her life, the end of her life, and she was looking back on all of the milestones that she managed to accomplish, she managed to achieve during her life. And I think a nice message with this is that, I don't know from experience, but I think as you get older, and maybe as you get sick, the things you look back on and really appreciate and really cherish, it's not how much money you earned. It's not what you achieved at work. It's the human connections. It's the laughs you had with your friends, the hugs you had with your family, the celebrations of holidays that you enjoyed together with the people you love. These are the things that I think we cherish as we get older. And I know that I'm guilty of taking some of these moments for granted. I think sometimes I fail to be completely present in the moment when it's Christmas with my family, when it's my fiance's birthday, when I'm doing different things with my mates. I think it's normal that we get distracted and you start checking your phone, or your mind is thinking about something else. You're overthinking work-related responsibilities. And for many people, we don't manage to really be there, to be there in spirit, in mind, and also in body. So this is a reminder for myself. And if I'm the only one who has this problem, then fair enough. But I don't think I'm alone in this. And I know that I should, whenever there are special moments, holidays with loved ones, family, and friends, I should try to take advantage of them and make the most of them and be present rather than being distracted. Because, as I said, these are the milestones that we look back on as we get older and we think, okay, maybe I should have done this or I should have done that. I think that's the way it is. Now, after that little bit of philosophy, I'm going to answer a few more quick questions. And these ones might be a little bit deeper. It's quite a deep topic, to be honest, talking about milestones. And the first one I'd like to answer is, do you think people feel under pressure to reach certain milestones? Do I think people feel under pressure to reach certain milestones? I'd say yes, for sure. And I'm at an age where a lot of my friends are talking about this. Maybe, in particular, some of my female friends will say that when they reach 30 or 35, they start to get more and more questions of, oh, when are you going to get married? Or, are you thinking about having children soon? Now, I'm not saying that this doesn't happen to guys as well. Of course, it happens to men as well. But I think it happens with women more, which it shouldn't. Let me make that clear. But in particular, female friends of mine sometimes complain that their parents, their distant relatives, friends of friends will ask them, when are you going to settle down? So people do feel under more pressure to reach certain milestones, and it's not nice. Nobody wants to feel under pressure because many stereotypical milestones are changing, and we are doing everything later on in life for a number of reasons. Cost of living, inflation, education, personal priorities. So, yeah, if you ever ask these questions, maybe try not to, because sometimes the people who receive these questions feel a bit under pressure. So that's the first question. How about the second one? It is, what milestone are you striving to reach at the moment? What does it mean to strive? To strive is to aim to do, to aim to achieve. So I could say that at the moment, a milestone that I am striving to reach at the moment is, well, I'm getting married in 6 months. So I wouldn't say I'm aiming to achieve it. I'm striving to achieve it because I'm going to achieve it. But once I get married, a milestone that I mentioned I'd like to achieve is getting on the property ladder. I'd like to buy a house within the next year or so. So it's something that I'm striving to do, and that's why I'm striving to save money. And related to that, my next question. Is buying a house still a realistic milestone for young people today? And I think it's getting harder and harder. It's getting more and more complicated, more and more difficult for young people to buy a house. At least to buy a house where they want to buy a house. Because of course, if you live in the capital of your country, it's going to be quite a lot more expensive to buy a house. Whereas if you look at a small town in the middle of nowhere, I'm sure it's quite affordable. So I think it is becoming harder and harder for young people to buy a house that they want to live in. But for most young people, if you really, really, really want to buy a house, then you have to change your goals, your objectives, and you have to look further afield. You have to look further away from where you would ideally like to move. And then in the future, hopefully, that property will go up in value. Maybe you'll get a pay rise and you'll be able to sell your first house and maybe, little by little, work your way up to buying a house in the neighborhood of a town that you've always dreamed of living in. But even still, it is definitely getting harder and harder, for sure. Now, to finish off, as usual, let's go over some idioms, some expressions, or maybe some phrasal verbs as well, because the first one is in fact a phrasal verb. Now, just like I usually do towards the end of the podcast, Here you can see on the left, these advanced phrases, and on the right, you have their possible meanings. What I want you to do is try to match them. The first one is settle down. Settle down. I've used it before. And to settle down is basically to start a stable life. To buy a house, try and start a family, and so on. The next idiom is tick all the boxes. Tick, 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 tick. Tick all the boxes. And well, if you tick all the boxes, it means that you meet all of your criteria. Let's say if you're trying to buy a house and you're looking at different flats and you see a flat that has 3 bedrooms, a balcony, washing machine, good kitchen, then it ticks all the boxes. It meets all of your criteria. Good. Now the third expression is a late bloomer. Are you a late bloomer? Well, a late bloomer is a way of describing someone, a person, who achieves success later in life. You could say that the famous actor, Pedro Pascal, he is a bit of a late bloomer in Hollywood because he wasn't that famous in his 20s or even his 30s, but during his 40s and now I think he might even be in his 50s, he's all over the place. So he's the perfect example of a late bloomer. After that, we have an expression that we saw 2 weeks ago when I was speaking about transport, and it is at a crossroads. I'm at a crossroads in life. This means that you are facing a big dilemma, a big decision. When I was at school, when I was 18, I was at a crossroads. I didn't know whether to study, to work, to do nothing. I was at a crossroads. Then we have turn over a new leaf. What does it mean if you turn over a new leaf? Well, turning over a new leaf is changing your habits, your way of being, from a negative to a positive. Let's say you committed a crime and you went to prison. Oh my God. After leaving prison, you decide to turn over a new leaf, to start a new life, essentially, and make it much more positive than it used to be. Now, the sixth expression is go through a phase. You could say a good phase, a rebellious phase, a dramatic phase, and so on. And what does it mean? Well, it is to experience a period of time, usually used with a difficult period of time. I went through a phase when I was a teenager and I hated myself. I thought I was fat, for example. So go through a phase is to experience a difficult period of time. How about the next one? Come of age. To come of age. If you come of age, you grow up. You become mature. You become an adult. So maybe you were a silly teenager, but then there was a moment when you came of age and you started to become much more mature. Excellent. Now, the eighth expression is a nice common one I use a lot. It means you've got a lot of things to do. You're very busy with work or other responsibilities. So have a lot on your plate is be very busy with work. And now we only have 2 left. The ninth, the penultimate one, is hit a milestone. And well, if you hit, achieve, accomplish, or reach a milestone, you reach an important achievement in life. That's, of course, what I've been speaking about for the last 45 minutes. And finally, we have find your feet, which I believe I mentioned on one of the shadowing episodes recently. If you find your feet, you adapt and get used to a new situation. When I started the job, it took me a while to find my feet. It took me a while to get used to the job. And there we go. Bravo, I'm clapping, because if you've reached the end of this podcast, then you are a legend, an absolute legend. And I hope you enjoy binge watching or binge listening to my podcast. If that is the case, comment binge. Let me know in the comments if you normally reach the end of the podcast, because I don't know if people click on it and then after 10 minutes, they get sick of it. They get bored of it. They get fed up of this guy speaking randomly. So if you do enjoy it and you find it useful and you learn some new expressions and you improve your slang and British English, and it makes you feel more confident when you're watching series or using English at work, then I'm really, really happy. I'm chuffed. I'm so chuffed. So comment binge if you like binge listening or watching my content. And thank you so much. And I'll see you next time. Bye-bye, guys. See you later. Ciao.